Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by another multi-passionate practitioner, and his name is Ben Calder. I was introduced to him by my friends Cassie and Alex, because Alex Dudgeon, he ran the Soul Medicine Festival in 2023. That's where I met Ben in person and had a session with him. And Cassie was like, you need to get him on your podcast because he's so amazing. And I agree. So Ben Calder is a practitioner, and he's been exploring health professionally since 2003 when he qualified as a kinesiologist. He's incorporated a multidisciplinary approach throughout his career and then formally transformed it into an integral approach in 2013 when he opened the Centre for Integral Health in Shrewsbury in the UK. Ben has had a lifetime interest in personal development, self-development, much of which has been done through meditation, Qigong, and shadow work. He is an integral relationships facilitator and also studied integral transpersonal psychology, along with many forms of healing and health development. He has worked with every age and demographic within his one-to-one work over the last 20 years and continues to find it inspiring and humbling to be part of the healing journey with individuals, couples, and families. And he's also given lectures, workshops, and talks to the mainstream medical system, as well as local special interest groups and events. So in today's episodes, we'll be covering Qigong, Bowen technique, which is what I had with him for the first time at the Soul Medicine Festival in summer, and I'll talk more about my experience in the episode. And he also covers more about kinesiology, which I've touched on a few more times with some of my guest experts over the years. A lot of chiropractors in the US use kinesiology, which is basically muscle testing. So Ben shares why he thinks it's best done in person and which techniques are actually best done in person versus can be done online through methods like Zoom. So I really think you'll love this episode. You can learn more about these techniques and maybe how they could benefit you. And just to get to know Ben and his approach, we have a lot of similar interests, and he's very spiritual and, like I said, multi-passionate, which is my favorite kind of practitioner, and it's such a holistic approach that he has. So let's get into the episode today with Ben. Hello, Ben. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Vivian. Nice to be here with you, finally.
I know this is our fourth attempt, I think, but the universe had other plans, technical difficulties, changes of schedule. So we're here today and it's meant to be.
Yes, absolutely.
And I've just shared your bio so the audience have a little bit of an idea as to who you are, what you do, but I'd love for you to share a bit in more detail, like how you got into this work to begin with, because I don't think people just become super passionate for no reason as a kid. Like, I didn't even know about any of these things unless you had a super spiritual, health conscious family. I'd love to know because I've not heard your story yet.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's quite I think it's kind of a bizarre story in a way. And depending on the types of areas that we look at, there are lots of elements that I can look back into my history and understand how I ended up here, going all the way back to separation of my parents when I was younger, 2 years old, and just the effect that that would have had on my nervous system and my psychology at the time, through to being a young teenager who I think because of that separation away from my father also had this thing about authority and didn't like behaving and wasn't a very good student in school. So I and at the time as well, although it was never diagnosed, I was dyslexic, dyspraxic. I had kind of what would be loosely termed these days as neurodiverse tendencies. And when I was in secondary school, I had this thing that we had this Christian youth group in our school who they were a source of annoyance to me at that age. I look back and I smile and I laugh these days, but they were a very self-righteous group of young teenagers that would wander around the school singing songs and doing all sorts of other stuff. So some friends of mine and we all decided instead to get involved in Wicca and paganism just to wind them up. But I kind of found that sense of connecting to nature and being in nature actually something that really resonated with me. And then when I was a little bit older, when I was 15 years old, my mum started taking me to essentially what was psychic development or personal development classes that she was attending that were run by a friend of hers just up the road from where we lived. And this particular friend who, you know, we would go along once a month and do various forms of like psychometry and other kind of sensing of energy type exercises. And they also ran a big New Age exhibition in Cornwall at the time where I was growing up. And Mum and I used to go and help out. We would, you know, help set the place up and, you know, do the kind of general running around. But they had workshops and talks going on in every year, and they always needed somebody to collect the tickets for the doors. And when the talk started, because there was a lot of meditation and other stuff going on, you couldn't allow people into the rooms once everything had started. So we either sat on the outside of the room stopping people coming in, or we would sit on the inside and listen to the talks. And I just got into the habit of listening, sitting in and listening to all these talks. So from age 15, I spent 3 days a year, every year, listening to perhaps 25, 30 different talks on health, self-development, all sorts of stuff like that. And I guess those were the real roots of what went on. And that's where I started learning and getting connected to Qigong as well, which is the mindful movement practice like Tai Chi that I do. And then I went away to university and did university and trained as a teacher. And at the end of university, I was very aware that I had quite a high dependence on drugs and alcohol. I wasn't a very healthy character at the time, and I needed to start doing something about it. And so I kind of, at that point, I went cold turkey on all the substance abuse, and spent 7 years kind of teetotal. And at the time, I was also then starting to experiment with vegetarian veganism in my diet. So this is back in the 90s. This is before it all got really fashionable, and kind of realized that I was making improvements in my health. And then at another one of these exhibitions, 1999, I happened to listen to a lecture by some people who became very important mentors and teachers in my life, Simon and Sue Lilly, who still have amazing work out there on a lot of spiritual practices. And Sue Lilly was doing a talk on kinesiology called Hacking Your Body's Computer. And I found that just really interesting. So I decided to go up to her after the session and ask her whether or not what she did would be helpful for me. And she said, sit down and let's find out. Because kinesiology being the practice that it is, it was more about, well, of course the potential's there, but we need to just work out for you as an individual whether or not that's something that's going to work for you. So and that began my journey. And then found a local practitioner closer to me up in Shropshire, and worked with her, and got such amazing results from that within a 6-month period. I thought, I don't like the job I'm doing. I need to change what I'm doing, and what she's doing looks much more interesting, but also much more in tune with who I am. And so I put myself on a kinesiology course, found that I had an aptitude for it. I went through the training, qualified in 2003, and ever since then I've been just building up this multidisciplinary approach, which the kinesiology I do gives you a really interesting inroad into that. But then as each individual we kind of explored it in our own way. So that's then where I added in things like the Bowen technique, the McLaughlin scar tissue release, the shadow work, also incorporate the Qigong into there. But I've also then studied things like aspects of homeopathy, herbal medicine, flower remedies, aromatherapy, done a lot of work with nutrition, functional medicine, epigenetics, and then further work into the body work in various ways as well. So I've just spent the last 20 years kind of developing this comprehensive toolbox of ways of working with people, and that's what I still do and love doing, and that's,
wow.
you know,
And it really has been your
yeah.
whole life, and you've just like grown and developed and added things as you've gone on.
Yeah,
That's so
absolutely.
cool.
I mean, as you know as well, we're required to do continued professional development as part of our registrations and insurances, and I'm just fortunate, and we're fortunate, I think, in our sector, that we actually get to choose things that have a real passion for us. So I've just been able to kind of meander around into areas that I see coming up for my clients and I want to understand better and that I'm interested in, and then we end up with this amazing collection of stuff.
Yeah, so fun, isn't it? I have to stop myself from doing another certification and like just be happy with what I have for now and let's give it time to like integrate. And I'm like
Yeah,
on to the next. But I
yeah,
love
yeah.
it. And I can tell you do as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But it isn't the body and aren't people and isn't life and the nature of how we move through it just absolutely fascinating. And to try and actually understand, there's like my Zen teacher Genpo Roshi, he would talk about this need for taking apart the self on a mental level in his sense and dissecting it so we can understand the parts, but that's so we can come back together and bring the whole back together,
Love that.
and see this in this big glorious thing that we call life.
And I even knew like years and years ago when I first started developing health issues, I had acne and digestive issues, and I would go to the top specialists in the medical world, pay privately to figure out what's going on because I was so desperate. And I would ask them, like, how is my diet impacting my skin? And they would blatantly, like, outright say there's no connection between acne or IBS and diet. And I just knew, even though I wasn't in the nutrition world at that time, I just felt that that didn't even make sense to me.
Yeah,
If
sure.
what we eat becomes our body, like how could it not affect the skin?
And it's probably the saddest thing that I feel about the kind of the mainstream medical complex is that their vision is skewed to looking at things in such a specific way that for the most part, and historically, although I think that's changing a lot more now, this view of the human being is so separated and limited from its environment, from the things that it might interact with. I mean, I haven't ever seen a patient with bowel cancer that has said to me they got nutritional advice from their oncologist.
Mm.
They were told that it didn't matter what they ate. And it's kind of like, how can your bowel be in such great disorder and there be absolutely no link between what's going on in terms of what you're putting in and how you're doing that and that disorder? It just, there's no logic behind that, but that's the mindset. But again, I'm grateful that it's changing more and more now.
Or if they do get advice, or even cancer patients, it's how to keep weight on. So if they're losing weight, then they're like, make sure you eat cakes and cream and like anything you want. And just that's
Yeah.
like the worst thing that you could be doing at that stage. If you're malnourished and you're like wasting away, they do give you nutrition advice, it's just to like make sure that you're not eating at all. But
Yeah,
the
yeah.
foods that they tell you to eat is probably contributing to the whole inflammatory process.
Yeah, and I see the same in cystic fibrosis as well. I've worked with a number of cystic fibrosis patients over the years, which for a lot of people, they see that as this excess of mucus and this prone to infection within the lungs, but really it's a pancreatic disorder and they're not digesting properly.
Right.
But because they don't digest properly, they're just told to eat anything, eat anything and everything to keep the
Yeah.
calories up, and it's a lot of sugars, a lot of carbs, a
The
lot of
worst advice
processed
they
stuff.
could get, basically.
Yeah, sure. And how's that going to make your pancreas feel? It's not going
I
to
know.
help.
Gonna
So,
put an extra strain on that organ.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. Is there anything that you've really like shifted your perspective on, your mindset? I know that you said before you were vegan, vegetarian, and I'm pretty sure that you're very against that now. Is there anything else?
Not against
Not
it.
against, but
I think the thing that has matured over time is that there isn't one route for anybody, and that, I mean, within the work that I do within epigenetics, one of the things we do is we use something called genetic body typing, and there are different ways for us to look at typologies within people, but in one of those we're looking at the simple differences between endo, ecto and mesomorphs as people, so basically small, medium and large for those of you listening in. and what some of the genetic heritage within those body types is, and what things they're more likely to be able to cope with, and how they're more likely to be able to digest and deal with things. And you've got some types, what we class as the gonadal types, that are much better off on dairy-free vegetarian diets with low protein where they graze, whereas the thyroidal types are much better on high protein, moderate fat, really low carb, essentially paleo keto style diets. And then the adrenal types within the group are much better on mixed diets. So that's where I fit into it. So I'm not exclusively either or, but I can do both as long as I don't spend too long a time in either camp. So what I found, when I went back into eating meat, it was really bizarre. I spent, as I say, 12 years veggie vegan. And in the last 2 years, my health was struggling so much. And I was trying everything I could. I was aware that there was a protein fat link going on in there. And it didn't matter how much vegetarian based protein fat I put in my body, as natural as possible, it was not solving the problem. And it took about 4 different people reviewing me, going, it looks like you really need some meat in your diet. And initially, because I'd been doing that all from an ethical standpoint, it took me a long time to kind of work out, okay, I've got to think about my health here. I've got to look at this on a larger historical context, that for hundreds of thousands of years, human beings have eaten meat in various forms. It's a significant part of what helped us adapt in certain ways. And there must be an ethical way for me to approach that. So I then started being much more specific about, as I reintroduced meat into my diet, it being organic, it being free range. I'm really lucky with where I live that 10 minutes away, we've got an organic farm. So I'm able to talk to the farmer about what he does, how he does it. I get to see his attitude and his approach. And so we get beef, lamb, chicken, pork. If I was doing dairy, I don't do dairy. It's not something that suits me, but we've got raw organic dairy available to us there. So those choices make the difference. And as soon as I started putting meat back into my body was like, oh yeah. And it felt so good. I was really concerned that after years of not having it, my digestion just wouldn't cope with it. And it was absolutely the opposite. It was just, oh my God, we've been waiting for so long. And I think for the first 3 weeks, I ate meat every day, and it was just like, oh, this
couldn't get enough. Like, give me all the iron, please.
Absolutely, yeah, sure. And that shift in the health has then been so much more consistent since then. And then the one extra refinement that I put in there a few years later, it's probably only about 3 years later, when I got my epigenetic body type, which I've known about for about 10 years now. And that really highlighted for me that within my genetic profile, because my genetics and my background are essentially Scandinavian, Eastern European, and so the nightshade family, which is again South American in origin and Central American, that there's a substance in there called alpha-solanine, which is very pro-inflammatory for some people who are susceptible to it. And it's known to be a trigger. There's the old kind of wives' idea that potatoes and tomatoes will exacerbate arthritis. So I'm one of those people that responds to the solanine in the nightshades. So I keep the nightshades out, and I just don't seem to process casein in dairy very well. So I keep all dairy pretty much out except for ghee, because ghee as a clarified butter doesn't really have any lactose or casein in it. I seem to be fine with that. So it's that maturation, that it's horses for courses, and you've got to work out that specificity for each person, rather than just saying, well, a keto diet's going to solve it or a vegan diet's going to solve it. It may or may not. It depends on who you are, why you're doing it. And some diets work great for like short-term fasting or short-term cleansing or rehabilitation, just to take some of the pressure off the digestion. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good long-term strategy for somebody to stay on a specific diet.
Does that body typing tie into the blood type diet in any way? Have you studied that?
Have, yeah, sure. There's a few flaws with it that historically don't always work out, because according to the blood type diet, I should be vegetarian.
Yeah, same.
Yeah,
I think I'm at A type blood.
Yeah. So I'm negative. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I felt the same. I read that and I was like, some things like maybe fit, but when it said to not eat meat, I was like, no, that's not going to work.
Well, you see, the thing is, I tried it and it didn't work, and that's the thing. I think throughout my time working, one of the things that's been important to me is actually investigating and experimenting. So things like food combining, you know, keeping your carbs and your proteins kind of separated. You know, I've tried that, and again, that's a phenomenal diet if you need to do a bit of restoration work. But as a long-term thing, again, it just was too impractical to work. So some things work in certain ways at certain times for certain people, but nothing works for everybody all the time.
And what works for you? What I used to eat like to try and heal is different to what I do now. I used to be like much more lower carb because I had a lot of insulin resistance and thyroid issues, and I was overweight. Whereas now I can tolerate more carbs because I'm moving more, because I have more energy and I'm building muscle. So just know that things fluctuate, or if I'm pregnant in the future or going through something else with health, things might change. So not being tied to one particular diet being right for you either.
Yeah, sure. And of course, we change as time goes on. What you need as a child, what you need in adolescence as you're going through all those secondary changes, what you need as a young adult, what you need as a parent, as a mother, what you need as you know, are in your middle age and as you become a geriatric. You know, if he kept it exactly the same all the time, it just wouldn't suit. And I'm a big fan as well of seasonal eating, you know, especially here in the UK, where we have such pronounced season, you know, from a Chinese medicine point of view, which is something within our kinesiology and in some of the nutritional work that I've looked at quite closely. We wouldn't want to be eating salads at this time of year in the winter, because that cold, damp food is adding cold and dampness into a system that's trying to resist the cold and damp of the environment. So again, even having seasonal adjustment, which I think is one of the reasons why we see more metabolic disorder and we see more digestive, more inflammatory and other associated diet issues, is because essentially the same food is available all the time, and it's always in roughly the same state, which for the most part is semi to ultra processed. And so the body is just like, do you know, I can't do this all the time. It's like listening to the same song over and over. The system actually is going to then start rejecting it because it's not getting the variance that we have evolved to thrive on.
And if the fruit that you're eating, like the bananas or the pineapple, has been shipped halfway across the world, it's probably been picked at the wrong time. And by the time it gets to you, it's got hardly any nutrients left in there, as opposed to
Absolutely.
someone like down the street growing apples locally in England. Like that's going to benefit you so much more.
Yeah, and I really love the idea of local growing, seasonal growing. Like we have our own allotment, so we get to kind of crop from that throughout the year, and we use a lot of local organic producers as well. And being able to take on the energy that's actually around you environmentally makes a big difference. And you know, and I know there's like super crazes for, you know, various superfoods that come from various parts of the world. And when I travel, I love eating local. I love eating the stuff that helped that society thrive, and you get a real sense of it, and it really helps you integrate. But you know, that's not where we are. That's not where I am in North Wales, you know. And so having a lot of tropical fruit in the middle of winter, there's just no real
Not a
logic
match.
in it. Yeah, sure.
My parents have an allotment, so I'm not doing the manual work, but I benefit from all the labour,
Brilliant.
which I'm thankful for.
Perfect. You should go and get your hands in the soil there.
Mm.
There's
Hmm.
nothing. There's actually a really deep association that I find, something that comes from knowing you've been involved in that growing process, watching that change throughout the weeks and the months, and then going and actually taking that stuff. You know, and I'm chronic for when I'm at the allotment, just like breaking bits of
Yeah.
leaves off and nibbling stuff to see how it is, and then bringing it home and making something and eating it. There's a real potency in that, which I think is another one of the things that has created this disconnection through diet, through lifestyle for us, is that, you know, we can buy chopped carrots, we can buy grated cheese, we can buy all this stuff that's in its form, it looks like it's a good idea, but it's disconnecting us from that relationship of actually tuning in, looking at what we've got, looking at what to make with that, and going through the process of combining it and then sitting down, the whole digestive process is in action throughout that, as both our eyes and our nose, and if we're nibbling away, our taste is starting to prepare the whole digestive system for what's on the way. Whereas if you're just taking something out of a box, jabbing your fork in a film, chucking it in a microwave, waiting for the ping, peeling off the layer, there's no heart in that. There's no connection.
And people might think that because they're not going through a drive-through, that they are like cooking and they're doing it all from scratch, but it's still a lot of convenience, isn't it? So
Really,
you're still not, you can still whip up a healthy meal in 10 minutes, but
definitely.
that's much better than going through the McDonald's drive-through. But although the convenience is good, it's also making us lazy, and it's that whole cephalic digestion response is being impacted.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just don't think that people are honestly making the association between what they do, how they behave, and the effect that it has on their bodies over time. And I mean, I know that you see it all the time. I see it all the time, that you get somebody to start eating real food, and within as little as like 4 to 6 weeks, the turnaround that they can have in how they feel. And it's become my 3-word mantra for, how do I start to get better? The first thing is eat real food, and if you begin there and just actually start learning what you like, what you don't like, what, even in terms of the rules that you follow around food and why you eat what you eat when you eat it. Like, one of my questions to a lot of my clients is, why do we eat cereal at breakfast? And the answer is because Kellogg's had a business plan. There is no other good reason for why we have cereal at breakfast.
Yeah, it's just
And there's
become the cultural norm, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And there's a great famous book called Potatoes Not Prozac, written by a lady called Kathleen Desmaisons. It's probably close to 20 years old at least now. And she would talk about how our addiction to things like coffee and cake and sugar, it's ruining our dopamine systems, it's ruining our neurotransmitters and our hormones. And she would really encourage people to move from the processed through to the fresh food section. And she would say, but throw out the rules. If you want to eat chili con carne for breakfast or have a steak, you have that. Don't let anybody tell you that that's not the right thing to eat. And again, you go around the world, and again, patterns of eating are very different. And this idea of like oats and cornflakes or stuff like that in the mornings, it just doesn't live in real societies.
Yeah, in the UK we have or in the Western world we have these like set breakfast foods like toast and cereal and pancakes and waffles and pastries and things, and then other like Asian countries are having like soups and curries and stews for breakfast. We really need to get out of this this programming that we have.
Yeah, sure. And a good fortifying breakfast for most people, something that actually with a reasonable amount of protein and fat in there, so they don't hit these kind of crazy blood sugar drops mid-morning and they're already losing concentration and needing to eat. It's always that thing that if you're already hungry by mid-morning, then your breakfast was inadequate.
Oh yeah, I used to think I was super healthy. Big bowl of oatmeal, banana, peanut butter, honey, cinnamon. I was like, I'm doing so well. It's so high in fiber. And then literally an hour later, I would be shaky and could eat a horse.
Sure.
But I just thought I had a fast metabolism, and then it didn't make sense because I was overweight at the time, and I was like, what the hell is going on?
Sure. Just riding that carb pony all the way.
Oh, yeah,
sure.
definitely. And other than diet, what are the top things that you think are contributing to chronic illness these days?
I mean, I'm in the process of just bringing together some material that I'm going to put forward under the name of preparing for wellness, and looking at the things that essentially we've stopped doing. And again, it really ties nicely into the integral model for health that I use. In the diet is one part of what in the integral model we would class as your external individual. It's your body. So we need to give the right fuel for the engine. We need to make sure that the parts are getting delivered. But the second real important aspect of that is in behavior. So it's in movement. And so for me, making sure that, and again, here you and I are sat down at desks, at screens, doing what we're doing now. And I can spend a good percentage of my day sat doing either administrative work, or sometimes when I'm with clients, I can spend quite a bit of time sat. And so movement has to be the other side of that, because we're bodies that, again, looking back into kind of paleo man, we were walking 12 to 14 miles a day quite regularly. We weren't always eating we were lucky if we were eating a meal a day. So, again, even the idea of like 3 squares a day, good old military idea, is not necessarily relevant, but our movement is essential. That whole lymphatic system, without that movement, is just not gonna do the process. So diet and exercise are keys. Right thought, we can look right back into the 8 limbs of yoga, the Ashtanga. Some of the first 2 are basically right thought and right action. So again, our thinking habits, our belief systems, and those both constitute the individual. They're the self, the internal and the external parts of the individual. And then when we look at the relationship then to the collective, the culture, the relationships that we have, so fostering good community, both with ourselves, with our partners, with our families, with our local and wider communities, so that we're generating health within those spaces. Get to know your neighbors, get to know what's going on in your local council, get to know what's going on around you. And then that links into your physical environment and your interaction with that. And like both you and I know, for instance, using a lot of like industrial cleaning chemicals, plug-in air fresheners, cheap toiletries, that kind of stuff is really detrimental to health. So having plants in our environment, having access to nature, connecting into the environment, again, that getting into the soil and growing, even if it's only a window box or something really simple, to have interaction with your environment in a way, and look at how your environment is, even from how ordered and how well kept the place that you live in is. Is there damp and mold going on? Are you in a place that actually you don't like coming home to because of the state of it? So what are the little things that you can do to shift those aspects that will then enrich the environment, the culture and the relationships, the movement, the diet and the mind? Because we cannot reduce ourselves to less than those 4 aspects. We're always a mind in a body, in a culture, in an environment of some kind. So how can we optimize and maximize those elements in the simplest way possible, and the most effective way possible?
It's a fully holistic approach. If only the local GP would touch on some of these things, or at least ask, how's your stress? What's your diet like recently? How have you been sleeping?
Yeah, sure. What's your relationship like? Are you getting any intimacy? Are you getting any cuddles? What kind of contact are you having with, pets, animals, children? What are the things that are enriching and nourishing your life? It's fundamental. And we can see, and especially since the pandemic, we are suffering more and more disconnection from our food, from our environment, from people, from the truth. We're just not even able to trust the words that come out of the politicians' mouths, out of the doctors' mouths, because we know that there are agendas behind that. And if you've been paying attention to the COVID inquiries it's been going on over the last couple of months, just the stuff that's coming out in that alone, let alone all the other stuff we were aware of. I think it's a really, really difficult time for humans, and we really need to find ways to take responsibility and take action for ourselves, and not think that we're being given information that's in our best interests, but to actually kind of explore what's right for us as individuals and then make connections into the collective.
The whole COVID thing could be a whole nother episode. We could be here for a very long time discussing that. It's insane. But when the movement piece, I do want to touch on that because you mentioned before you are a fan of Qigong.
Yeah.
I'd love to know more about that. I think my grandma used to do Tai Chi.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And I used to be like, why are you doing this? It's so weird because it just looked like she was doing nothing at all.
Yeah.
And she wasn't like massively spiritual. I just thought she was doing it because she was older and that's all that she could manage.
Sure.
But how could it even benefit younger people?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I love the fact that that's what she used to do.
Yeah.
And if you ever want to give yourself something weird to do for 15 minutes, go and find videos of people doing Tai Chi, and then put lots of different types of music on
Oh
over the
yeah.
top of it.
Like rap music.
Yeah, well, and like heavy rock and all sorts of
Yeah.
other stuff, and because Tai Chi is part of the spectrum of Qigong, essentially. So Qigong, that it breaks down into two words: Qi, which is energy. We see it as Ki in Japanese, or prana in kind of Vedic systems, and Gong means to practice. So it's an energy practice, and what we're doing, essentially, for most part, is a series of mindful movements, coordinating with our breathing, with the idea of cultivating internal energy and building up the internal fire, the internal vitality that we all have. And we see children and a lot of animals do this kind of almost effortlessly, but as we get on, we've got old patterns that then start to reduce that. We build up a lot of residual tension in the body. We have patterns of movement that, I mean, if you've been sat at the laptop for 4 hours, do you feel like you got more energy or less energy at the end of it?
A lot less.
So we've got adaptive patterns that suit the lifestyle but don't suit the organism. So Qigong as a form of mindful movement has, and in Life Force Qigong, the system I teach, we have a series of practices that help us unlink from these residual tensions, loosen and open the energy gates, the joints in the body, and start to get deeper into our own presence with our felt sense, getting connected to our bodies, what they need. And we do alignment work so we can bring the body into a better state of alignment, so we're encouraging natural energy generation within the body, and then we strengthen and relink the body into healthy movement. And so we're doing these very gentle practices that are great for the mind because they activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So they help us come into that relax, restore, repair system, which improves our digestion, reproductive, immune functions. And it helps to reduce then anxiety, improve sleep within the body. We know that it lowers blood pressure. We know that it improves pain perception. We know that it helps balance issues. We know that it stimulates the immune system. It's supportive for people undergoing cancer. Most anxiety disorders, Parkinson's, balance issues, surgical and trauma recovery all benefit from this very slow movement because it doesn't trigger stress within the body. It allows us to stay within this window of tolerance. It's really gentle. And there are branches of Qigong that are specifically medical. There are hospitals of Qigong in China that they'll then teach you a prescription of movement to go away and do to help your health conditions. And there are practices that are specifically around vitality, spiritual practices, so we can develop our own spiritual self and our connection to spirit in a wider sense. And then there are the health practices, and then there's the martial practices like Tai Chi. So Tai Chi technically in its true form is a martial art, but it's just done in a way that allows a lot of precision and focus into the balance and the alignment of the body, which can make you take some of the top practitioners in the world around that, and their ability to remain stable and to be able to repel people trying to invade their space is just incredible to watch and incredible to feel. So it can do a lot for us, and it's a progressive practice that builds up over time. So whereas yoga essentially is primarily a physical practice with some subtle elements to it, Qigong is what we would class as a 3-body practice. It conditions both the physical body, it works with the subtle body, so the meridians, the chakras, the subtle energy within the body, and it's working in the causal body as well. So it's working with the mind and helping us to get out of that space of mind and being able to refine how we use our mind, what happens to our energy when something moves. We can notice when we've come out of our own center, when we've come off balance, and it teaches us how to come back to that once we've recognized it. So I mean, it's a beautiful practice. it's the thing that no matter how I feel, I can use it to regulate myself back into a greater state. And so, deeply in love with it.
Yeah, it's like a meditative practice, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. While being fully present. So it's not that you kind of, in meditation, you can drift off and lose
Mm.
connection. In Qigong, eyes open. I'm
Hmm.
here all the time. I'm with you all the time. But my body can move in these ways that are soft and flowing and yet powerful. And there's this fullness of energy and connection. You do it out in nature as well, as the best version of it. And you just feel like you're one with everything. It's beautiful.
Wow, amazing. Just thinking back to my little great grandma. She was like in her 80s doing it. And I remember she was like always pretty vital and very flexible as well. Like she never did any like stretching, but she could like put her legs around her head and like do
Yeah.
forward fold with the legs straight. And I'm like, you go, grandma.
Yeah, and that's it. Because I mean, you think about a lot of disease as we get older. There's a lot of lymphatic congestion. There's a lot of congestion of the bowel. There's a lot of issues within the joints, and these are all the things that Qigong is helping to work with. So the soft movements are keeping that synovial fluid and the interstitial fluid moving in a
Hmm.
gentle way. The bowel requires movement to aid peristaltic action. The lymphatics are entirely reliant on our movement, and it doesn't have to be super vigorous, but just doing some regular soft gentle movement. And if you look at the work on kind of the blue zones on how to live to 100, one of the key elements that's in that is that there's daily movement involved in those people that reach those high ages.
Yeah, a lot of people focus on the diet things, like they're all plant-based, which they're actually not, are they?
No,
But
sure,
it's all
not at
like,
all. Meat,
yeah, I
cheese.
know. Yeah, but there's also
Yeah,
the community aspect, the like
yeah.
spiritual side. I think they're more likely to be the factors that contribute.
Absolutely, yeah, sure. And I don't think we are doing enough as a society to really highlight what creates success in that way. And this is why I want to write on this body of work on preparing for wellness, because I really detest this. I mean, I'm sure you've had it in clinic as well, that when people come in and they tell you that the doctors told them that the way they are is because of their age.
Mm.
And like that's firing squad stuff for me, because and again, a fabulous colleague of mine, Patrick Pearson, who unfortunately is no longer with us, many years ago said to me that there are no real diseases of old age, there are only diseases of extended bad habit. And
Mm.
so all we need to do is look at the habits that don't serve that individual and refine them back into a state of health. And the
Hmm.
amount of clients I've had who in their 70s and 80s have gone from thinking, literally thinking they no longer want to be here because life is so uncomfortable for them, to having that fresh vitality where they can interact with their grandchildren again. They want to go and do stuff. They've got passion and spirit, just from teaching them that actually this doesn't have to be this constant decline down through suffering. You can do something about it.
Yeah, and we're living for longer, but we're living in a longer state of sickness.
Yes, absolutely. And that's it. Life expectancy and health expectancy, they're two different things. And I don't want to live old if it means that I've just got to accept the fact that it's going to be a path of suffering. If you want to take the Buddhist view of it, of course, there's all life is suffering, but that's about our attachment to being in a particular way. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
if we can adapt and we can be flexible and we can find our way through that physically, mentally, emotionally, there's no reason why we can't have a better experience of ourselves aging.
Yeah, you're totally right. Because my grandma, she was like so vital and fit, but the thing that killed her was lung cancer from smoking. So that
Sure.
bad habit, she was like all spirit. She was doing her flexibility things, and I could only imagine what she'd be like if she hadn't have smoked for like decades.
Yeah, sure. And I remember there's a famous teacher called Shipi Ki who taught something called Yin Bagua, which was a type of internal martial art. And in his 80s, I can remember his main European disciple, who was a guy called Andrew Nugent Head, would go and train with him. And in his 80s, Shipi Ki could throw this young man around. And when he wasn't doing his Bagua practice, he was chain smoking. you know, and I know that Andrew used to really struggle because Shibiki used to spend a lot of time sat in these little rooms with his mates drinking tea, smoking fags. And so Andrew used to go outside and just continue doing his practice, and Shibiki would be like, look at my student, he's so dedicated. And it's just because he couldn't be around all the cigarette smoke all the time. But you know, so they'd be smoking, drinking tea, smoking, drinking tea, and then they go out and do all this internal
Oh my
martial
God.
arts, move around in ways that their flexibility and so on and the
Mm.
strength were just incredible. So in a weird way, it was like an antidote.
Yeah, like balancing it out, kind of.
Yeah, sure. It's kind of like, you know, having a glass of water in one hand and wine in the other, isn't it? It's like
Yeah.
balancing the two.
And we're not promoting drinking or drinking in excess, smoking on this
Not at
podcast.
all,
Just
not
as
at
a
all.
this is a reminder.
Yeah,
Another technique that you practice is the Bowen technique.
yeah,
And I actually met you in person, didn't I, at the festival last summer?
yes,
And I actually had a session of Bowen technique. I kind of went into it like, I'll give it a try. I don't really know what it is. But I definitely noticed a shift afterwards. But I'd
yeah,
love for you to explain like what it is first.
yeah.
And yeah, because I feel like it's not something that's spoken about commonly.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've been involved with Bowen technique now again for over 20 years. It's one of my funny kind of moments in my career as well, that on my first kinesiology training course, I was struggling with my back. I'd had back problems since I was younger. And one of the other people training on that course was a Bowen therapist and said to me, "Hey, at lunchtime, you know, would you like me to do some Bowen?" I'm like, "What's Bowen?" You know, so they did a session on me. I was wearing inserts in my shoes at the times because I thought that was going to try and help me. But she said, get those things out. They're not helping at all. Did a Bowen session on me. I stood up afterwards, my back just feeling like incredibly shifted and so much better. And in my head, I went, have I just started training in the wrong therapy? And so, you
Oh,
know, and I kind of then had Bowen throughout my kinesiology training and my early years of practice, knowing that I wanted to get back round to it. And then in 2010, 11, I managed to go and do the training for it and qualified from 2011. So it's a light touch, soft tissue manipulation is how we would describe it in kind of very simple terms. It's not like a massage. It's not like osteopathic or chiropractic treatment. It's not like other fascia release techniques like rolfing or deep tissue work. It's very, very gentle. It seems to have this incredible ability for working with the sensitivity of the body. And I really kind of see it as like we drop a stone into a pond and watch the ripples move through the whole system. So the moves, there's a very particular move called the Bowen move, which is a light rolling movement that's done over certain places on the body. And these are both key loading points in terms of where connective tissue comes together, and they're often key acupuncture points as well. And like Tom Bowen, when he developed this, didn't realize that, but learned it as he went along. And, you know, as he was learning about why the things he did were successful, he was also studying and trying to understand. And, you know, we now know that a lot of it was linked into acupuncture. And there were aspects of osteopathy and chiropractic that definitely informed him, but he came up with this unique way of working. And it's so gentle. We try and assess and treat the body as a whole rather than chase pain, but it allows the body, because the input that we use, the Bowen move, is not stressful. It's not intended to be stressful. It sets off this reaction both in the nervous system, in the lymphatic system, in the connective tissue, that's like something's happened, but it's not stressful. So what's going on? And it literally, it's almost like this little inquiry then starts going on through the body. And when you do it, you know, you often do it on both sides of the body. So you'll do one side of the spine, other side of the spine, and then there's communication moving between them. And because it's not a painful input, it seems to lead to this body just adjusting the tissue itself, almost like it's trying to return to a default and reset itself. And it just allows changes in alignment, hormonal function, lymphatics. It's incredible for, again, for pain, for injury recovery, surgery recovery. works really well with things like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue as well, because again, a lot of that, there's often a lot of lymphatic congestion, and it just allows for that movement in the tissue. But it works again at this physical level with the connective tissue, with the fascia, with the lymphatics, with the nervous system, with the meridian systems. So again, it's a really comprehensive practice, and can be done on anything from pregnant mothers, newborn babies, all the way through. We work with a lot of athletes, amateur and professional within this. One of the kind of the famous proponents of Bowen technique is Bear Grylls. It's something that he's credited as really helping to keep him in condition for the type of stuff that he does, all the way through to people in later life as well. So, again, it's one of those things that I regularly go and receive, keep myself in alignment, so it can be used both as a corrective thing with acute issues and as a maintenance preventive treatment as well.
And I noticed a shift after just one session with you. So you were working at Alex's festival, the Soul Medicine Festival, and I saw you had a little stall, and Cassie, his wife, and my friend, she's like, you need to go and see Ben. You'll totally like love his work and give Bowen technique a try. And I was like, okay, then I'll be a guinea pig like I am and just try anything. And I think he was asking like, do I have any issues? I can't remember what my problem was at the time, but I might have mentioned that I had, because I go to chiropractor once a month, and they said that I have one leg slightly shorter than the other, so I'm always like a little bit lopsided, and it can cause some like sciatic pain sometimes, and I get trapped nerves sometimes, especially if I do like certain moves at the gym. And afterwards I felt like a foot taller. I could really feel a shift. It felt like I was walking weird. You said just like have a little walk around for 30 seconds, and I felt like I was walking differently. And I definitely noticed a shift. And there were times in the therapy that I was like, what's going on? Because I didn't really feel anything that was happening. So I was like having a look around, and you're like, just relax, like everything's fine. This is how it is. I remember having a similar experience during a lymphatic massage, because I love massage, like deep tissue, like really getting in the painful ones I love. And then once I went to lymphatic massage, and I was like, what the hell is this? Like, why have I just spent like £50 on this massage and they're hardly touching me? But I didn't know the benefit of that. And the next day I was absolutely floored. Like my energy, I had such a detoxification response, because I didn't know at the time I was living in toxic mold, and I had like so many infections that it was so effective, but it was just very light touch that I just like brushed off. I was like, oh, it's not going to do anything. So after that experience, I was like, right, okay, I'll trust these types of like more sensitive treatments.
And of course, Bowen is quite different in the sense of a lot of treatments. And often we'll do a sequence of movements, and then we'll go hands off and we'll leave you. And this is what I was saying about letting those ripples move throughout the pond. It's actually giving the body time to respond. So from my point of view, I see it as a really healthy communication, a conversation where my hands are non-verbally asking a question, and then your body is thinking about it. And then I come back and reassess what's happened. And where you were talking about that difference in the leg length, we can assess in Bowen technique what we class as functional leg length, because rarely, unless there's a historic artifact like a break or a joint replacement, rarely is there actually a difference in the leg length. What you're looking at is a distortion, typically in the pelvis, but what a lot of people don't realize is that can be caused by a sustained spasm in something called your dura membrane, which is inside your spinal column around your spinal nerves, and it only attaches in 6 places: coccyx, sacrum, and lower lumbar at the bottom of the spine, and then C2, C3, the occiput at the back of the head, and the back of the sphenoid bone at the bottom of the skull. So for example, you could have a short right leg, you could have those sciatic type pains going on that right side, but it might be that it's the right side of your jaw where that spasm is happening in that dura membrane, and that's causing that all the way down through the spine and affecting the other end. And it can be vice versa as well. So a problem at the lower end can affect the neck and the shoulders, the jaw. So, we assess within Bowen to work out where some of that stuff is going on, so that we can target the right point of the body, which is why you then had that experience minutes if you got off the couch, and it's like, wow.
Yeah.
Actually, we've got a different kind of structure there.
That makes total sense, because in the past I've had issues with TMJ, like jaw tension. I've had braces several times. So I feel like my jaw is a lot more narrow than it should be. The chiropractor's always working on my neck, and I always get like a reaction after that. I feel a little bit dizzy, and I've had a history of dizziness. So yeah, that makes total sense to me. That's crazy.
Yeah, good.
And the very last thing I want to talk more about is the kinesiology. I told you at the start, I've had a few people mention it here and there. Some of the chiropractic physicians in the US who have been on, they use kinesiology. But I know there's like slightly different ways of doing it. Some people like teach self muscle testing, so you can like train to do it on your own, or they use like these like vial things. I don't really know too much, but how do you use kinesiology in practice?
I mean, for me, it's essentially the selector. It's a way of finding out what I need to do for somebody, because we take a case history, we listen to somebody, we can observe them, everything from, let's say, iridology, tongue, pulse, skin tone, there's movement. There's lots of ways we can look at people, but we're still essentially making an educated guess. Now, kinesiology is manual muscle testing, so it's a functional test where, at its very basics, we place a limb in a fixed position. So, for example, I might lift my arm up at the side here. So that's then my middle deltoid activating that movement to lift my arm up. And as a kinesiologist, I would then press down on the limb to try and oppose the action of that muscle. So I'm moving in the opposite direction to the normal contraction. And the body can essentially do one of two things. It can either sustain that position because there's no issue with either the physical limb, but we can also use this more subtly within the body as well. So it can either sustain the test or it can't. The muscle is inhibited for some reason and can't behave normally. Now, you can use that just on a functional assessment sense to look at what's working okay, what isn't, where you would need to kind of address physical rehabilitation, which was what it was originally developed for back in the 30s. And then in the 50s, a chiropractor, George Goodhart, realized that you could link it into the Chinese 5-element meridian patterns, and he found then that certain muscles associated with certain meridians and therefore certain organs and certain systems. So he was finding out, for example, that when he was dealing with quadricep and hamstring issues, that digestive issues were also improving within people because there's a relationship between those muscles. So we use it in bioenergetic kinesiology as a way of essentially asking the body what it wants. So and what people don't realize is they've done the mechanism of this their whole lives, but nobody taught them how to watch it. So we can offer the body something and it's either going to go, yeah, that's going to be useful for me, or no, that's not useful for me. It's a very binary response that we're giving. And so when we look at a substance, for example, and we could use a test vial that maybe has gluten in or dairy in or something else in, and we can place that on the body somewhere, and the body is going to tell us from that nervous system point of view what its relationship to that thing is. So we either then have, yeah, I'm fine, everything's all right, I don't have a problem with that, or it's going to go into inhibition. I don't like that. Don't give that to me. We can also then take a body that's showing a weakness in some way, and we've got ways of being able to find out if there's a weakness. And we could then, for example, bring in something like magnesium or a B vitamin or an essential fatty acid or a color or a sound or something else, and find out if that then improves that inhibited state back to one of stability. And as I say, we've done this out throughout our whole lives. So, for example, when you get bad news, when you get good news, when you see someone you don't like, when you see someone you do like, when you go somewhere you don't like, like if one of your friends turns around and says to you, hey, do you want to do this thing today that I'm doing? You'll get this immediate sense of either not really or, yeah, that sounds great.
Can also be like a lean forward or lean back.
Kind of, but sometimes it's just a sinking or arising, an opening or contracting. And those are all versions of the same thing. So in terms of self-testing, as long as you can be objective about the outcome, you can use it as a barometer for actually just observing what's going on. And as a kinesiologist, I have to not care about what the answer is, because it just is what it is, so I can't have a vested interest in what comes up. It's for that individual, they're unique, they're individual. But like, for instance, if you're doing self-testing, you test whether or not it would be a good idea to have a piece of chocolate cake. Yeah, exactly.
Like strong.
Exactly. That's way too loaded a question. You can't be objective about it, because there's an emotional part of you. Because at a physical level, you and I both know that there's never a time when the body needs chocolate cake. Okay, it just that isn't a thing. So we already know that we're not testing from that level of nutrition. It might have a neutral effect on somebody's body depending on what their balance of nutrition is, but it's not going to be beneficial. But emotionally, yeah, of course it might.
So it's always better, you'd say, for someone else to do the muscle testing on you.
If it's stuff that's of significance, definitely. If it's stuff that's inconsequential, then I don't mind doing testing for myself on that. And I think if you've got enough practice, then you can reasonably do that. But if there's anything significant that I want looked at, I will always go and see a kinesiologist, because I need them to not care about the outcome. I need them to just do it because that would be the optimum thing for me as an individual. And that gets me out of the way, it gets them out of the way. And it's actually helped me find stuff that I never would have come across had I not done that and worked in that way. So yeah, I love it. And we can incorporate everything with it. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I've studied in lots of different things. And so when people come and see me for kinesiology, I can use that to work out, do we need something like a homeopathic remedy or a vibrational remedy or a nutrient, or do we need body work, or do we need something else? Do we need psychological work? And I've done a lot of training in, integral transpersonal psychology, in shadow work, in integral relationships work. So we can work out different types of things at different levels, which is again why this integral approach really, really works for me in the clinic.
So which of these things work okay online versus in person? Like, which of them have to be in person?
Bowen, absolutely in person. Can't do that anything other than hands-on, and the scar tissue work hands-on. Kinesiology, it can be done over distance, but I personally don't find the results are as good. I think that interaction, because if I'm sat here online using my muscles to test for you, there's a certain amount of separation in there. And I think the better we have a concrete experience of a thing, the more accurately we can test about it. And a very easy example of that would be that if you and I have not been to Fiji, but we want to work out whether or not Fiji is a good place for you to go and visit energetically, what I'm then testing is my concept of Fiji, which in my mind is, coral seas, white sands, and palm trees. And I don't know if that's actually what Fiji is like, and how often do we think the product looks good, buy it, and it's not what we expect it to be.
Instagram versus reality.
Absolutely. The concept versus experience can be so varied that we can end up very far away. So especially when it comes to things like nutrients, supplements, foods, I always want to use samples of those rather than guess. Because, if we ask the body if it needed like a B vitamin complex, how many brands of B vitamin complexes are there, and the variance, the strength, the quality, the excipients. We need to be specific about it if we're going to get good quality answers. So if my concept is in any way, my concept is always partial, it is always limited. So I need to give it the most concrete version of that I can, so that when I say, when I test on the body like magnesium, 3 and 8,
So
citrate,
many different versions.
whatever, that when I put that version of that thing on that body and we test it, it's either the right thing or the wrong thing, and we're clear about it rather than an idea. So there are, personally, I think there are limitations in online with kinesiology and things like the Bowen and the scar work. You cannot do that way. But things like the Qigong, I teach online as well as having my in-person classes, so you can join in and learn with that. The shadow work that I do with people to look at those psychological reasons why they can be so reactive to other people, why other people get on their nerves so much, that can all be done nicely online. And in fact, you can e-learn that stuff. I've got a course that you can e-learn through that. And the integral relationships work and the psychological work. So I do quite a bit of mentoring online with people and conversations. I often work with men, just working through some of their kind of personal stuff. Because again, I've trained in things like NLP and other stuff along the way as well. So all of that talk-based stuff can easily be done online. But the kinesiology, the Bowen, that stuff really needs, for me personally, to be hands-on.
Amazing, good to know. And where is your clinic?
So I have clinics in Chester and in Shrewsbury, and obviously we've got our online school as well. I'm based up in North Wales, which is where I do a lot of the Qigong stuff as well.
Lovely. And before I let you go, have you got time for another few quick questions for yourself? Yeah, amazing. So the first one is, what's one thing that you're into lately? So is there something new that you're researching, thinking of studying?
I'm building a sauna in my back garden.
Amazing.
That's my current project. And that really is going to be combined with whiskey barrel plunge tanks that are coming in well. Again, some research that I've come across over the last year or so, looking especially in Norway and Finland. They've done some really good research. All-cause mortality down by up to 50% for 4 or more saunas a week. Cognitive decline down 25% for 4 or more saunas a week. And so just the health benefits that come from saunaing, incredible. Plus then the cold water from doing the plunge after. So that's my kind of excitement at the moment.
Yeah, that temperature shift I think is huge. We're so used to being in our regulated houses and always wrapped up, and we can always shift our temperature so easily. Whereas if we go back to our again paleo primal ancestry, we would have had those extremes. We wouldn't have had central heating and air conditioning.
No, definitely not. It was all washing in rivers if we were lucky. Rivers and lakes, And fingers crossed I'll have that sorted by Christmas, which would be great.
That'd be amazing. Second question is, what's your go-to breakfast?
Go-to breakfast.
If you do breakfast.
I do breakfast, and I do breakfast pretty religiously, and it's always a cooked breakfast. So we typically have 5, 6, 7 types of vegetables that get sauteed. So typically we've got courgette, fennel, carrot, mushrooms, celery, often greens going in there as well. And that gets all sauteed up. There'll then be eggs that go with that. So usually boiled eggs, poached eggs, that kind of thing. And then depending on the day and the week, I might include a little bit of bacon or some black pudding or some avocado in there. I don't have those things a lot. So it's really the eggs and the veggies that are the big thing for me.
Lovely. I've not had black pudding for a long time, so that sounds really good to me.
Oh, that's awesome.
I am a fan. I know, so good. Is there a book recommendation that you can share? So it could be on any of these techniques that you've covered today.
I think, one of the things I think that we really need in the world at the moment is better relationships, better communication, better connection. This is why I love the integral relationships work that I do with Martin Uchik, and his book Sex, Purpose, Love. So Martin Uchik, UCIK. His books are amazing. Once you've read it, you will understand why your relationships have been so hard and why you've struggled in them, and all the little things that you can work with to improve those. And I just love that work. So Sex, Purpose, Love. Amazing.
That will be added to my list. I've never heard of that one before. And then very last question, Ben, is where can people find you online? So your website, social media. I know you're pretty active on Instagram.
Yeah, sure. So website is bencolder.co.uk. So that's Calder, not cold as in blue. So bencolder.co.uk. And then you'll also find me on Instagram at Benji Calder. You'll find me on Twitter at Benji Calder. You'll find me on Facebook at Ben Calder Integral Health. And then we've got the Centre for integralhealth.com, which is the clinic down in Shrewsbury, which is my clinic. And again, our Facebook for that is Integral Health Shrewsbury.
Lovely. I will put all of those in the show notes if people want to check you out.
Cool.
Are you at any of the festivals again in the summer?
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
going to be Soul Medicine Festival that you
Yeah.
and I met, which evolves into Soul Revolution Festival in 2024. I'm
Mm-hmm.
hoping to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Hoping to be at the Eden Festival up in Dumfries again. I've been at that one for many years. Hopefully, I'll be back at Community Russell Brand's Festival this year again. Om Base. I'm also going to be at the Living Well Festival in Shrewsbury this year, and hopefully U-Fest up in Chester as well. So those are the ones that are eye-lined at the moment.
Very busy year ahead.
Always.
And thank you so much for joining me today. We finally got to chat, and I'll probably see you again at one of those festivals in the new year.
Thanks so much,
So yeah,
Vivian.
it's been great. Thanks, Ben.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot, Vivian. You take care.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, I would love for you to leave me a rating and review on your podcast app, as this helps to support the show and it allows it to reach more people with this valuable information. Come and say hi over on Instagram. I'm at Viva Natural Health. And if you haven't already, check out my website, vivanaturalhealth.co.uk, for tons more free resources and to discover how I could support you further. I currently offer one-on-one consultation packages if you want my top-level support, then more affordable group programs and self-paced online courses. So there really is something for everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you back here next week for another episode.